what happened is I go to work for the Taylor Companies. I'm the HR secretary for the boss, Bobby Taylor, and Mr. Taylor to all his employees. And I don't know how long I'd worked there, 3.5, 4 years or so. And I started digging into drawers and closets to clean up for just something to do because I was getting bored. And I started coming across these pictures that were, I could tell they were incredibly old, like from the 40s and 50s, big 8x10s, and strange pictures of like ferries and railroad cars and these men in like, yeah, what is it? What was the name of the guy that Lucille Ball was married to? Yeah, those suits, the Desi Arnaz suits. You know, the Cuban influence. So I started asking questions, and Bill, who was the vice president of the Taylor Document Company at the time, said, oh yeah, the brothers were in business and all these different variety of businesses over the years, and they had all these different kind of companies going on, and Bobby Taylor basically has all these companies now, which were like residuals of all the businesses they started. So I'm digging a little bit further, and then some family members would come in, and I'd ask them, what's this picture, who's in these? And they would tell me all the names, and after a while I got to the point where I went, somebody has to write this story up. Somebody has got to tell the story of this family because it's incredible. They had dealings sort of halfway with Fidel Castro in Cuba. Papa Doc Duvalier, who was the leader, the dictator of Haiti, was on their yacht at one point when there was a presidential coup going on at the palace. They got the phone call, and Papa Doc Duvalier's like, oh, okay, I'll send my military out there to take care of this coup going on at the presidential palace. They owned a yacht that later was sold to the President of the United States Staff and Corps for a presidential yacht. I mean, it was huge. And they were responsible for bringing fruit from Central America and the Mediterranean up to Norfolk. They started their mercantile business by coming up through the Dismal Canal. They'd bring fish and farm goods up here and trade it for things and take it back down to Carteret County, North Carolina. Well, when they got up here, they said, okay, you know, there's a little spit of land over here that I think would make a really good dock for some ships to bring in produce. So the land that Nauticus is sitting on now used to have this old, ancient, creaky wooden dock. They would bring in the boats and unload all the bananas, the fruit that they'd be bringing in. And so the dock and the warehouse and that little spit of land became known as the Banana Pier, or the Banana Dock, because that's where all the bananas came in. And there was a lady that worked for one of the companies, Southern Salt. She became the vice president. She was one of the little clerks, secretaries. She'd remember the guys would come in from the ship with a jar behind their back and whip it out, put it on her desk, and run out, and there's tarantulas that were in amongst the bananas that they were hoping to scare her with. And so these brothers became quite wealthy. They were involved in the rail car ferries when the ships would go up and down the seaboard, but they also got into railroad shipping. So when Henry Flagler built his railroad all the way down to the Key West, they had a port there that they would load the railroad cars onto the ferries and then go the 90 miles across the water to Cuba. They had plantations there that they were picking the bananas and all the other fruit off of. So they'd load up the ferry cars, put them back on the ferries, bring them up through the railroad and all the way up here to Norfolk. And in addition, they were loading them on boats. Well, right about the time Fidel Castro started fighting for the freedom and the rights of all the Cubans, the Taylor brothers decided, you know, there's something that's going to come out of here that's not going to be good for us, because he's communist, socialist. So what's going to happen to all our rail car ferries and all our other, you know, land holdings and things in Cuba? So what they ended up doing is they saw the writing on the wall, so they started taking off all their old, decrepit ferry cars and leaving them on the railroad in Cuba, and all the brand new ones and the best ferry cars that they had, they loaded them back on the ferry to go back to the Key West. Well, they knew the time was coming when all of a sudden they had a whole bunch of passengers that were begging to buy tickets to get on the ship. And they're like, what's going on? It's like hundreds of people are here trying to get on the ferry. We think Castro's about ready to take over. So what they did, they actually left a few good ferry cars behind in order to get these thousands of people on their ferry. They were pulling away from the dock as Fidel Castro's soldiers were coming into the port to arrest the brothers, the captain of the ship, and take possession of the ferry. So they just got out at the last tail end and saved their assets, as well as thousands of people who would have been left behind and never been able to leave Cuba otherwise. So during World War II, some of the cargo ships that they owned, they actually, the federal government came in and said, we need these ships to move troops. So they took over, basically. I think they paid them dimes on the dollar, I don't know, for the value of the ships. And so I think there was about 4 or 5 ships that the federal government took over, and they became troop transports during World War II. So they did, I think 2 of the ships were sunk during the war, one in the Atlantic, one in the Pacific. But the Germans were very prevalent in going up and down the East Coast. And believe it or not, a lot of people don't know this, but they were bombing the ships and using the sub-torpedoes to sink cargo ships that were from the United States. One of the things that was occurring was the dead bodies from these sunken ships would float up on shore. And the doctors, the morticians, the people that were trying the best they could would pick up the bodies from the shore, but they were all mangled, or, you know, if they were able to find a hand that looked like they could get some fingerprints off of it, sometimes the skin would become degloved, that they could slide the hand off. This is sort of gross. But the morticians would slide their hand into the skin and then take the fingerprints so that after the war they could try to identify the bodies, whether they were Americans or Germans, after the war, so that they could tell their loved ones, we've got their fingerprints, this is who they are. So after the war ended, the Taylor brothers were able to get 1 or 2 of the ships back, and of course they bought them back really cheap, and they had to renovate them again. But you know, after that they had bought I believe a hotel in Florida, so they were like big fancy hotel owners.
Beautiful place.
Beautiful place. One of the brothers actually bought thousands of acres of land here in Virginia Beach, and it was over there off of Dam Neck, and he owned the land, and he was a horse racer, horse breeder, a farmer. I mean, he was a gentleman farmer, gentleman horse racer. And so after a while, the federal government came to him and they said, we need to buy your land because we've got something big that needs to come in there. So he sold probably 80 to 90% of his property, and today that land is NAS Dam Neck, where the Navy aviation station, all the jets take off and land, and his daughter retained some of the land. And if you're driving down Dam Neck today and look over on the right hand side, you'll see a sign saying Taylor Farms.
That's what I was thinking the whole
That's
time.
his
Taylor
daughter.
Farms. Yeah, I think I know her.
That's his daughter. So she's been doing the best she can. I think she actually had her house moved onto the land about 10 or 15 years ago. But, you know, the history of the Taylor family is just incredibly interwoven with all these famous people and the adventures that they were on. And, you know, I mean, just imagine being on that ferry, pulling away from the dock, and you seeing Castro's soldiers coming in the jeeps and the tanks and everything to arrest you, and you just got away. You know, being able to provide the United States government troop ships for World War II and the troops, as well as being able to help them with the land for our flights of freedom now, the jets pulling out of Dam Neck. I think that I worked for 2 years compiling the history of the Taylors. And like I said, the Taylor name is so common. You're like, okay, it's like Smith or a Chinese name Lee. It's like, can you really go that far back? I was able to trace the family all the way back to just after Jamestown was settled. The first Taylor that I was able to identify in America, his name was Lemuel. His wife was never named, but I had, for 2 years I was entering all these names and birth dates and death dates and connecting people left, right, and center until I ended up, when I was able to compile the lineage. But anyway, I think I came out when the software that I was putting the information into, I think the lineage turns out to be almost 600 pages long. And the history that I wrote, which was the second volume of the book, was almost 400 pages long. So it's like almost 1,000 pages, and ended up, printing them out and binding them and giving them to Mr. Taylor for Christmas from all the employees of the companies. And if I didn't have this man's help right here, I don't think I could ever have gotten started. So he was very instrumental in me putting that together. And where does this all tie in together with all my books and my genealogy and my artwork is that once I was able to compile those books, I realized that the software that I'd entered all the data into enabled me to create not just the Taylor company, the Taylor family lineage, but there were 19 other families that I could print out their family lineage, and they were like 200 or 300 or 400 pages long too. There are, what was very interesting that I thought, some of the descendants of Pocahontas intermarried into some of the families in the Carteret County families, and they probably don't even know it because they probably have not traced their own lineage down through the years. But I got 20 lineage books created for those particular surnames from Carteret County. And what I did is, because the Carteret County Historical Society had provided me so much help, I donated the copyright for those books to the museum. Later on down the years, I kept on entering genealogy data, correcting some, adding to, fixing things that were wrong, and ended up with, at this point, I have over 138,000 names of individuals in my software database. And I could probably create another 250 books of just family history or lineage from the software that I've created. And I've started doing that. I did some for my own family. My mother's maiden name is Hensley, so I created a Hensley lineage book. And then I think after that I probably had about 10 total lineage books. And then, because the process for putting them out there for self-publication, I'd gotten it down to a science, I started looking around at other things. The next book I actually started working on was this one that was called Women That Shaped the World. I started getting these emails a long time ago about these women and women writers, and I don't know exactly where they came from. It might have been the Girl Scout Council or Writer's Digest or something like that. And I enjoyed reading them. They're very short. So I started collecting them onto a Word document, and after a while I realized I had a very large document of these little bio summaries, and I thought, you know what? I'm going to bulk these up and add a little bit more to it, but I'm not just going to write the bio. I'm actually going to find other resources where if you're reading the book and you open it up and you say, okay, you know, Jacqueline Bouvier Kennedy Onassis, here's a short little bio of her, but underneath it I'm adding other resources where you can go, if you're really seriously interested in finding out more about her, use these resources to read more about her and find out about what she is and as a woman, why she's so important to the world, because she really is. I mean, she was the wife of JFK. Not only that, but also Onassis, and she became a publisher and a writer herself. And she did actually contribute more to the world than people give her credit for. This baby, last time I presented, I actually said, has anybody been pregnant? And like half the room raised their hand. I said, have you been pregnant for 10 years? And they're like, no, I haven't. Well, that's how long it took me to compile this book. It was a 10-year baby, and I published it right after I completed my PhD at ODU and put it out there. And I'm very proud of this one because of what it is and how reflective it is for women in the world and how well they did. And then another thing I like to do is collect quotes. You know, everybody loves quotes. I mean, you put them behind your signature on your email. People like to put them in their books. They like to start off speeches with them. So I started collecting quotes, and I'd get the names. And if I wasn't quite sure where or who said the quote, I'd do a little research and try to find out who was the original person who wrote the quote. So I started compiling, and when the dust settled, I've got like 23,000 quotes of all these people that are just amazing. And then I started sorting them into different topics, like quotes about love, quotes about women, quotes about inspiration, quotes about motivation or things of that nature, and started saying, well, these can become books too. So I created another 10 or 15 books full of quotes. And then after that, I started looking around and thinking, you know, I could probably help other people create and write books too and get them published. And I have 2 services now with my consultancy that I offer to writers. One of them is if there's a PhD out there that has completed their dissertation, they've graduated, and they want to take that book and commercialize it. I can actually convert it into a commercial book. And I just this last week published my 5th book for a PhD who wanted to get their work, their research studies out there. And I also have a series of books called Interview with an Artist. And what I do is I identify an artist who has some good work. It's not just because they're an artist, but because they have fine artwork that is aesthetic. It's got some beauty to it. It's got some thought to it. It's good, and it's saleable. And they make their living, or at least part of their living, off selling their artwork. Then I'm going to help them out by giving them a platform, which is a book, and it's basically an interview. I give them 100 questions to ask. They answer the questions, and then I will insert the photographs of their artwork into the book. And it ends up being about 80 pages. And then I put it out there so that people can buy the book and learn more about them. Or the artist can buy the book at cost and then resell it for retail and make some money on it themselves. So I don't make hardly anything at all on these books, but the artist can make even more royalties on it than I do. So I've done that. And then one of the things that I've been doing a lot recently is I've always loved paper, just the feel of it, ripping it up and using it and gluing it and painting on it. So the artwork that I've started creating recently is all recycled materials. I got a stack of magazines about this tall. I start ripping the pages out and sorting the colors and then tearing them, and I use 3 different types of art sort of methodologies. If you remember when you were in elementary school, you took bubblegum chain wrappers and made the chains. That's one of the methodologies. And then origami, which is paper folding. And then the other one is simply folding paper into shapes that are long. It's called quilling. They're real thin, long strips of paper in solid colors. You roll them up into like cylinders and then pinch them until they become shapes like squares or triangles or things like that. So then what I'll do is just glue them into the 3-dimensional effects on the paper and build them up until they really do have a sculptural effect. And that's the most recent things that I've been working on.
They're beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you. And so I've got the peacock, the lizard, the little owl peeking out of the tree trunk. I've got the mandala. I've got the wolf and the buffalo up there. And I've got the seahorse up front. And this one is one of mine too. This one's actually sort of a secret type of photograph or picture. It's called Playing Football Behind Marilyn's Back. And if you were ever in junior high school, you remember folding paper into footballs and then using your finger to flick them across to your classmate. They might be notes in them or something like that. Well, if you flip this picture over, there's a picture of Marilyn Monroe made up of all these different quotes that are made up of the poster. But everything that I've created with the paper folding is recycled. The paper's recycled, the frames are recycled, the mats are recycled, the mat boards that I put the artwork on is recycled. So that's part of it. And then because I love the paper and the mandalas, I've started creating black and white mandalas and then turning those into coloring books, which has become quite popular in the last month or two. It's just like an explosion of interest with people that like to sit down, relax, and just veg out, and they'll take coloring books and just their crayons or their markers or whatever and go for there. So about 2 weeks ago, I actually finished my 80th book, and so 60 of them are on Amazon. The first 20 I can't really count because I can't sell them because I gave away the copyright. But I have updated those books, and they're part of the 60 I have on Amazon. So that's the secret of Salt, Bananas, Nauticus, Papa Doc, World War II, the Germans.
And what did you do when you worked for them?
I was the executive assistant / human resources manager for Robert Taylor. And I worked for the company, I believe, for about 6.5 years. And then I left probably, I think it was about 2 or 3 months after the Christmas that we presented those genealogy and history to him.